Picture a pillar of fire burning so intensely and so continuously that the energy just being wasted right into the open sky could, well, completely power the entire country of Colombia.
Which sounds completely made up.
Right, like a hypothetical scenario,
Yeah.
but it is not. Right now, in Venezuela, these massive industrial flares are burning off raw natural gas at a rate that actually matches the entire flaring output of the United States.
It's staggering.
It really is. And today, we are looking at the billion-dollar, highly controversial geopolitical gamble to put those fires out. Welcome to another deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us.
We are dissecting a really fascinating and honestly incredibly tangled geopolitical puzzle today.
Yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover.
For sure. Our roadmap is this detailed economic and geopolitical report from the platform KULT. It's titled, The U.S. also wants Venezuelan gas, but a lack of infrastructure complicates the plan.
And our mission for you on this deep dive is to sort of look past the standard headlines. We want you to understand the mechanics of this sudden, massive rush of foreign oil and gas companies into Venezuela.
Right, because it's not a simple process at all.
Definitely not. We're going to explore the staggering logistical nightmares these companies are facing and how a practically invisible environmental crisis might actually be forcing everyone's hand.
To really set the scene here, let's rewind a bit to the end of February 2026.
Okay.
So, Venezuelan President Delcy Rodriguez posts a video on X. She is sitting down in this working meeting with high-level executives from the multinational oil giant, Shell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the caption talks about advancing a cooperation agenda, exploring new investment opportunities, developing their gas fields, all that stuff.
Which is a huge deal.
Exactly. And the timing of that video is definitely not an accident. That meeting and the agreement signed between Shell and the Venezuelan government happened right around a diplomatic visit to the region from the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum.
So you have U.S. officials in the neighborhood, and simultaneously, massive European oil executives are just shaking hands with the Venezuelan leadership. Okay, let's unpack this. Because for anyone who has even casually followed South American politics, that setup sounds impossible.
It really does sound like a contradiction.
Right, because for half a century, Venezuela famously nationalized its oil and gas industry. Like during the Hugo Chavez presidency, kicking out foreign corporations and maintaining absolute state control over natural resources was, a core pillar of their national identity.
A massive source of pride, yeah.
So how does a heavily sanctioned country suddenly find itself signing energy agreements with international megacorporations?
Well, the mechanism that made that February meeting physically possible was a massive legal shift that happened just 1 month prior.
In January.
Right, in January 2026. The Venezuelan government amended the organic hydrocarbons law. And to understand how monumental this is, you really have to realize that for decades, the state-owned oil company, PDVSA, was the only game in town.
They ran everything.
Everything. If you wanted to touch Venezuelan oil, you did it strictly on their terms, under their complete control, and they held the purse strings.
Which means foreign companies carried a ton of risk with very little actual operational control.
Exactly. But that completely changes with this January amendment. The new law drastically reduces the role of the state.
Interesting.
Yeah, it allows private investors to have much greater participation. They can form these partnerships where they actually get greater control over the day-to-day operations of the projects.
Oh, so they're actually running things now.
Running things. And most importantly, they get direct access to the revenues. They aren't just waiting around for the state to pay them a cut. They have their hands firmly on the financial steering wheel.
I mean, that fundamentally rewrites the rules of engagement. I was trying to picture the scale of this pivot, and it really is like an exclusive VIP club that has been fiercely guarded for 50 years.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. And the bouncers, the state, they were notoriously rigid. You didn't even get to look inside unless you basically handed over your wallet at the door. Then, practically overnight in January 2026, management just throws the front doors wide open, hands out VIP operational passes to global corporations and says, "Come on in, run the bar yourself."
That visual captures the shock of the policy shift perfectly. But, we do need to add a crucial layer of nuance here.
Okay, what's the catch?
It's specifically regarding natural gas as opposed to crude oil. Emiliano Terán Mantovani, who is a researcher at the Central University of Venezuela, heavily featured in the KULT report, points out that the natural gas sector actually had a side door propped open long before this January reform.
Wait, really? So the strict nationalization rules didn't apply equally to gas?
Not entirely, no. Tehran Mantovani points to this major offshore field in the waters of the Gulf of Venezuela. It's called Campo.
Okay.
Private European companies, specifically Eni from Italy and Repsol from Spain, have actually been out there exploiting gas as part of the Cardon Fourth Consortium for years.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, and it has consistently been promoted as one of the most vital gas fields in all of Latin America.
So the precedent for foreign companies extracting gas was actually already quietly established.
Exactly.
But looking at the KULT report, it seems like this new 2026 law takes that quiet precedent and just amplifies it into a full-blown gold rush.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Shell isn't just maintaining old projects, they're actively signing agreements for massive offshore gas development. They're locking down onshore oil and gas opportunities in the eastern state of Monagas, specifically the Corrido and Pirital fields.
Yeah, they are moving fast.
And they are even embedding themselves locally, right? By signing technical and commercial agreements with a Venezuelan engineering firm called Vepica, along with international heavyweights like KBR and Baker Hughes.
What's fascinating here is the invisible bureaucratic shield making all of these massive corporate moves physically and legally possible.
Because of the sanctions.
Right. Passing a law in Venezuela doesn't erase the reality that the country is under severe international sanctions. Operating there should technically lock a company like Shell completely out of the global financial system.
So why doesn't it?
The reason lies entirely with OFAC. That's the Office of Foreign Assets Control, housed within the U.S. Treasury Department.
I always hear OFAC brought up in these geopolitical reports. They are essentially the financial enforcers of U.S. foreign policy, right?
Exactly. They are the architects and the enforcers of the sanctions. And Tehran Mantovani explains that the U.S. government hasn't just broadly lifted all sanctions on Venezuela. That didn't happen.
Okay, so what did they do?
Instead, OFAC has been granting gradual, highly specific licenses to these companies.
I see.
Gregor Clark, the manager of the energy portal for Latin America at Global Energy Monitor, or GEM, he notes that while the U.S. has historically strictly prohibited private companies from operating in Venezuela, these new OFAC licenses act as a sort of targeted force field.
A force field against their own sanctions.
Pretty much. They grant specific private companies permission to operate, shielding them from the crushing secondary sanctions that would normally destroy their business.
Which means the U.S. Treasury is actively, deliberately paving the way for this corporate influx. But OFAC handing out hall passes only solves the legal problem on paper. It doesn't physically pull the gas out of the earth and transport it across the world.
No, it definitely doesn't.
And that brings us to the massive geographical wall that Shell and these other companies are slamming into.
The physical reality of extracting this resource is just a logistical labyrinth. I mean, let's trace the map for two specific projects Shell is deeply invested in.
Okay.
You have the Dragon gas field, located offshore in Venezuelan waters, and the Loran-Manatee gas complex.
The Loran-Manatee field is wild to me because of its geography. It literally straddles the maritime border between Venezuela and the island nation of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, the gas reserve doesn't respect the international boundary drawn on the map above it.
Nature rarely does.
Yeah.
And that border straddle creates an incredibly delicate diplomatic and physical challenge. Tehran Mantovani lays out the fundamental imbalance at play here.
Which is what?
Well, Venezuela owns these massive production fields. We are talking about top 10 global natural gas reserves, but they completely lack the physical infrastructure to extract it, process it, and bring it to international markets.
This is where I was thinking of it kind of like an ATM card.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So Venezuela has this massive overflowing bank account of natural resources beneath the ocean floor. They are incredibly rich in gas, but they completely lost their ATM card.
That's a good way to put it.
They have absolutely no physical mechanism to withdraw that wealth and actually inject it into the global economy.
Right. And sitting right across the maritime border, Trinidad and Tobago is essentially holding a platinum ATM card.
Because they have the infrastructure.
Exactly. They have the deep water export terminals, the processing plants, and the shipping infrastructure perfectly set up. But Trinidad and Tobago is facing the exact opposite problem. Their own domestic gas production is sharply declining.
So they have the machines, but no cash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their massive processing plants are hungry for a resource they are literally running out of.
It is the ultimate geopolitical marriage of convenience. Venezuela has the gas, but no infrastructure. Trinidad and Tobago has the infrastructure, but needs the gas.
It's perfect on paper. The catch is, making that marriage work requires physically connecting the two.
Under the ocean.
Yeah. You have to engineer and construct a massive cross-border gas pipeline along the ocean floor between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. And Shell isn't the only one mapping this out either.
Who else is looking at it?
Gregor Clark's research for GM notes that British Petroleum, BP, is also targeting a natural gas project in that same border area called Manikin-Coquina.
If you are listening to this right now, just pause and think about the diplomatic tightrope involved here. You are talking about engineering an international undersea pipeline that connects a heavily sanctioned, politically isolated nation directly into the global energy market via a neighboring island.
It's incredibly complex.
It requires aligning international law, corporate interests, and the U.S. Treasury Department all at the exact same time.
And beyond the diplomacy, it requires capital. Building pipelines, offshore rigs, processing facilities. It requires astronomical amounts of money and time.
Which really begs the question, who is footing the bill? Because the numbers cited in this KULT report are staggering.
Well, they really are.
According to the Venezuelan Association of Gas Producers, just to double the amount of gas currently being extracted, which includes getting those offshore fields operational, it will require a capital investment of at least $15 to $20 billion.
Billion, with a B.
Right.
And take that a step further and look at reactivating Venezuela's wider decaying oil industry. The estimates jump to between $80 billion and $183 billion.
That is just incomprehensible.
You are looking at a country facing massive economic, geological, and engineering deficits just to get production back on its feet.
The money is staggering, but the timeline is where I really struggle to see the corporate logic.
How so?
Well, the GEM analysis clearly states that oil and gas projects initiated in 2025 will take at least 15 years to become operational.
Yeah.
Wait, 15 years? If the entire developed world is aggressively pushing for an energy transition away from fossil fuels, isn't pouring up to $100 billion into a 15-year gas project a massive financial gamble? Why would a boardroom at Shell or BP approve that level of risk?
Your skepticism is entirely validated by the experts tracking this. It is a profound gamble.
I mean, it has to be.
Gregor Clark from GM actually points out that the 15-year global average for a new field to become productive might be a generous underestimate for Venezuela.
Wait, so it could take even longer?
Oh, easily. When you factor in the geopolitical friction, the completely deteriorated state of local infrastructure, and the high upfront costs, hitting that 15-year mark would be a miracle.
So they are betting billions on a timeline that could easily stretch to 2 decades.
Easily. Clark breaks down the math behind the risk. Developing existing fields, ones that already have some foundational work done, is the cheaper route. That is your $10 to $20 billion price tag.
Okay, that makes sense.
But to meaningfully increase Venezuela's overall production, you have to find and develop entirely new fields. That is where you hit that $100 billion mark over a 10 to 15-year period.
Wow.
And as Clark argues, in a 15-year window, the global energy market is bound to experience extreme volatility. Combine that with the political volatility of Venezuela, and the risk matrix is just off the charts.
Yeah, Tehran Mantovani specifically notes in the report that the core structure of the Chavista regime remains firmly in place.
Right. Politics haven't changed.
Exactly. And that creates enormous hesitation for investors because the future direction of Venezuelan politics is a complete unknown. You could invest $50 billion today, and in 8 years, the political winds shift, the U.S. pulls the OFAC licenses, or the state demands control again.
It is market volatility colliding head-on with political volatility.
Which leads us to the most urgent part of this entire deep dive.
Yeah, this is the really wild part.
While executives in European boardrooms debate 15-year timelines and $100 billion infrastructure budgets, what is physically happening to the gas coming out of the ground in Venezuela today?
Right now.
Because the KULT report highlights a practically invisible, immediate environmental crisis happening as we speak.
Yeah. To grasp the scale of this crisis, we need to understand a mechanical concept called associated gas.
Okay, break that down for us.
When a drilling company sinks a well looking for crude oil, it is very rare that they just hit a clean pool of oil.
They get other stuff, too.
Exactly. Usually they hit large pockets of natural gas that are mixed in with or trapped right on top of the oil reserves. That byproduct is associated gas.
I was thinking the best way to visualize this is to think of a vigorously shaken bottle of soda.
Yeah, perfect.
The crude oil they want to extract is the liquid, but the associated gas is the carbonation, the intense pressurized gas trapped inside. When you drill the well, it's like popping the cap off that shaken bottle. The gas rushes to the surface violently.
That is exactly the physics of it.
Yeah.
When they extract the oil, that associated gas races to the surface under immense pressure.
And they have to do something about it?
They do. If the engineers don't do something to relieve or redirect that pressure immediately, it will cause a catastrophic, deadly explosion at the extraction site.
So they are forced to deal with it instantly. But as we established earlier, Venezuela doesn't have the ATM card.
Right. No infrastructure.
They lack the pipelines, the storage tanks, and the export terminals to capture this gas, bottle it, and sell it. So their only option to prevent the wells from exploding is to just destroy the gas on the spot.
They do this through a disposal method called flaring.
Right.
They route the rushing gas up into massive industrial towers, literally called flares, and just ignite it. They burn the natural gas off into the open atmosphere 24 hours a day as it comes out of the ground.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the scale of this burning is almost impossible to comprehend.
It's massive.
The report cites data from the International Energy Agency, the IEA. They found that an astounding 80% of all the gas that makes up Venezuela's reserves is this associated gas.
80%.
Yeah. And because of that, the total volume of gas Venezuela flared in 2024 was equal to the total amount of gas flared by the entire United States.
Think about the disparity in oil production between those two nations, though.
Oh, it's huge.
Venezuela has a fraction of the total oil output of the U.S., yet because their infrastructure is so degraded, they are matching the U.S. in the sheer raw volume of burned gas.
And here is the IEA statistic from the report that absolutely stopped me in my tracks.
What is it?
The amount of natural gas that Venezuela just burns off into the sky, completely wasted, in a single year is equal to the total gas consumed by the entire country of Colombia.
An entire neighboring nation's annual energy consumption just set on fire and vented into the sky because there's nowhere else to put it.
It's tragic.
And the environmental damage is devastating. Burning this associated gas releases massive amounts of methane.
Which is terrible for the environment.
It is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. It traps heat in the atmosphere far more effectively than carbon dioxide in the short term.
Wow.
The IEA reports that because of these enormous continuous burnings, Venezuela is currently the 8th largest emitter of methane gas in the entire world.
Which obviously puts them in direct conflict with global climate initiatives.
Completely.
Gregor Clark points out the obvious. Developing new oil and gas fields and perpetuating this kind of extraction is completely incompatible with the goals of the Paris Agreement.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
We are faced with one of the strangest environmental paradoxes in modern geopolitics. Tehran Mantovani argues that if this associated gas could be recovered, like if the actual physical infrastructure existed to capture it instead of burning it, it would dramatically reduce Venezuela's climate impact.
Wait, let me make sure I'm totally following the logic here.
Sure.
The traditional environmental concern is that extracting fossil fuels is terrible for the climate, period. But in Venezuela's specific, unique case, they are already extracting the oil, and therefore they are already releasing and burning this massive amount of associated gas.
Yes.
So inviting foreign companies like Shell to come in, build pipelines, and commercialize that gas might actually be the only way to stop the flaring.
That is the core of the paradox.
Yeah.
Yes, the ultimate end use of the natural gas still involves combustion.
Right, someone's going to burn it.
Exactly. If Shell captures it and sells it to Europe or Asia, someone is going to burn it for energy. But capturing it, processing it, and using it efficiently in a power plant is drastically less harmful to the global climate than just venting it and flaring it raw in these massive industrial towers.
Because of the methane.
Yes. Flaring releases raw methane and black carbon directly into the atmosphere, causing catastrophic warming with zero energy benefit to anyone.
So the foreign investments that OFAC is suddenly handing out licenses for, those billions of dollars could actually finance the recovery of this associated gas.
Precisely the argument. By bringing in international companies that actually have the capital, the engineering expertise, and the legal clearance to build those cross-border pipelines, like the one connecting to Trinidad and Tobago, you theoretically cap the flare towers.
You take an active environmental hazard and turn it into a commercial product.
Exactly.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together because we have covered a massive amount of geopolitical and physical ground today.
We really have.
We started with the foundational puzzle, a nation sitting on world-class gas reserves, but entirely lacking the infrastructure to move it.
Right.
We saw how the January 2026 amendment to the Organic Hydrocarbons Law fundamentally shifted 50 years of state-controlled policy, opening the doors for private investors to take operational and financial control, pulling global giants like Shell to the table.
And then we examine the physical hurdles of geography.
The ATM problem.
Right, the necessity of partnering with Trinidad and Tobago to access their export terminals, which requires cross-border undersea pipelines that have to navigate a maze of diplomatic and maritime law.
We looked at the daunting financial and temporal reality. We are talking about $15 to $20 billion just to double gas extraction and upward of $100 billion to revive the wider industry.
And all of this is pinned on a timeline that stretches 15 years into a highly volatile, completely uncertain political and economic future.
And finally, we confronted the staggering environmental cost of doing nothing. The status quo means continuing to flare enough raw gas to power the entire country of Colombia, anchoring Venezuela as the 8th largest methane emitter on the globe.
This raises an important question as you look at all these moving parts. Can a nation with such a historically unpredictable political landscape successfully partner with foreign megacorporations to rebuild a decayed industry?
It's a huge unknown.
And perhaps more urgently, can they physically build the infrastructure to get this gas to market before the global energy transition makes those massive reserves entirely obsolete?
It is a high-stakes race against time, geology, and global climate policy.
Absolutely. The KULT report makes it abundantly clear that while the ambition is clearly there, and the U.S. Treasury is easing sanctions just enough to let the major players onto the board, the friction of reality, the astronomical costs, the 15-year timelines, and the local politics is immense.
Which leaves me with a final thought I want you to mull over today.
Okay.
As we've discussed, if the only way to stop one of the world's worst ongoing methane leaks is to invite global energy giants to build billion-dollar infrastructure in Venezuela, what happens once the world starts relying on that gas?
That's a great point.
If global corporations and climate goals suddenly become dependent on Venezuela to plug their energy gaps and solve this massive methane crisis, does that permanently immunize the Venezuelan government against future international sanctions?
Oh, wow.
Right. Once they are deeply embedded in the global solution, it might become impossible for the U.S. or anyone else to ever isolate them again.
It really forces you to reevaluate the true cost of these geopolitical compromises. Solving an environmental crisis might just permanently alter the balance of international power.
It is not a straight line at all. It is a puzzle where every piece changes the shape of the board. And that is all we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack the deep complexities of the Venezuelan energy landscape. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for those hidden connections, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.